On what seemed like an ordinary summer night in Ohio, a white Toyota Camry raced down a suburban roadway at nearly 100 miles per hour. Seconds later, it veered off the road and crashed head-on into a brick building with tremendous force. Inside were three young people: 20-year-old Dominic Russo, 19-year-old Davion Flanagan, and behind the wheel, 17-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla. The collision was devastating. Dominic and Davion were killed instantly. Mackenzie survived. At first, investigators treated the incident as a tragic traffic accident. But as they began examining surveillance footage, vehicle data, and crash reconstruction evidence, a far more disturbing theory started to emerge. According to prosecutors, the final moments before impact revealed a driver who remained on the accelerator as the vehicle accelerated toward the wall. They argued the evidence pointed not to a loss of control, but to a deliberate decision. The defense saw the case very differently. They maintained that Mackenzie never intended to harm anyone and suggested that a medical condition known as POTS may have caused her to lose consciousness behind the wheel, turning a catastrophic accident into something that looked intentional. Years later, the debate continues. Was this a heartbreaking accident or a calculated act that claimed two young lives? Long before her name appeared in headlines across America, Mackenzie Shirilla was simply another teenager growing up in suburban Ohio. Born in 2004, she came from a supportive family and attended high school like countless other young people her age. Friends described her as outgoing, social, and deeply involved in the typical world of teenage relationships, friendships, and social media. On the surface, there was little to suggest that her future would become the subject of one of the most controversial criminal cases in recent memory. At the center of Mackenzie's life was her longtime boyfriend, Dominic Russo. Dominic was 20 years old and had known Mackenzie for years. Their relationship had become a major part of both of their lives, shaping much of their teenage and young adult experiences. Close to Dominic was his friend Davion Flanagan, a 19-year-old known for his loyalty and easygoing personality. The three young people shared the same social circles, the same memories, and many of the same plans for the future. To outsiders, they appeared to be ordinary teenagers navigating the challenges of young adulthood. But beneath the surface, tensions had been building for months. Arguments, breakups, reconciliations, and emotional conflicts had become a recurring part of Mackenzie and Dominic's relationship. What began as a typical teenage romance was gradually evolving into something far more complicated. No one could have imagined that within a matter of weeks, all three of their lives would become forever connected to a single event. An event that would leave two young men dead, one teenage girl facing murder charges, and an entire nation debating what truly happened on that summer night. By the summer of 2022, Mackenzie Shirilla and Dominic Russo had been involved in an on-again, off-again relationship for years. Like many young couples, they shared happy moments, future plans, and strong emotional attachments. But according to investigators, friends, and evidence later presented in court, their relationship was also marked by frequent arguments, breakups, reconciliations, jealousy, and emotional conflict. Prosecutors would eventually describe it as a volatile relationship, one that repeatedly shifted between affection and confrontation. Neither side disputed that the couple argued. The real disagreement centered on what those arguments meant and whether they played any role in the tragedy that would soon follow. One incident became especially important during the appeals process. On the 17th of July, 2022, roughly 2 weeks before the fatal crash, Mackenzie exchanged a series of text messages with Dominic's mother. In those messages, she claimed that Dominic had grabbed the steering wheel while she was driving on the highway, causing her vehicle to nearly lose control. At one point, she wrote, "He tried to end my life." The messages painted a picture of a frightened young woman who believed her boyfriend had endangered her during a heated confrontation. Years later, Mackenzie's new legal team would argue that these texts deserved far greater attention. They claimed the messages suggested Dominic had previously interfered with a moving vehicle and that investigators should have considered that possibility more carefully when examining the fatal crash. Prosecutors viewed the situation very differently. They pointed out that there were no independent witnesses, no video footage, and no physical evidence confirming Mackenzie's version of events. In their view, the messages represented only an allegation made during an emotional dispute. Whatever truly happened that day remains known only to the people involved, but one fact is undeniable. Just 14 days after those messages were sent, Mackenzie, Dominic, and Dominic's closest friend, Davion Flanagan, would find themselves together inside a Toyota Camry heading toward the final moments that would change all of their lives forever. On the evening of the 31st of July, 2022, 17-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla was driving her white 2018 Toyota Camry through the suburbs of Ohio. Riding with her were her boyfriend, 20-year-old Dominic Russo, and Dominic's close friend, 19-year-old Davion Flanagan. At first glance, the drive appeared completely ordinary. Surveillance footage captured the Camry approximately 59 seconds before the crash. Investigators later reviewed the video frame by frame and found nothing unusual. The vehicle remained within its lane. Lane changes appeared controlled, and Mackenzie activated her turn signal properly. To prosecutors, those details mattered. They argued that the footage showed a driver who was alert, responsive, and fully capable of controlling the vehicle. But less than a minute later, everything changed. Another camera positioned closer to the crash site recorded the Camry traveling at roughly 98 miles per hour, nearly 160 kilometers per hour. At that speed, a vehicle can cover an entire football field in just a few seconds. Investigators then examined data stored inside the car's event recorder, often referred to as the vehicle's black box. The findings became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. According to the data, during the final 5 seconds before impact, the accelerator remained pressed to the floor. Rather than slowing down, the vehicle continued moving at an extremely high rate of speed. Investigators found no indication of emergency braking, no measurable attempt to reduce speed, and no evidence suggesting the driver tried to steer away from the obstacle directly ahead. Moments later, the Camry suddenly left the roadway and headed toward a brick building. Then came one of the most disputed questions in the case. Who turned the steering wheel? Defense attorneys later argued that investigators could not conclusively determine whether Mackenzie made the steering input herself or whether Dominic may have reached over and interfered with the wheel during the final moments. However, authorities stated that no physical evidence supported the theory that another occupant had taken control of the vehicle. 5 seconds. That was the amount of time between a speeding car and a tragedy that would soon spark one of Ohio's most controversial murder cases. In a fraction of a second, everything changed. Traveling at nearly 100 miles per hour, the Toyota Camry slammed head-on into a brick building with tremendous force. The collision was so violent that the front end of the vehicle was virtually destroyed, leaving behind a scene investigators would later describe as catastrophic. Emergency responders rushed to the crash site, but for 2 of the young men inside the vehicle, there was nothing that could be done. 20-year-old Dominic Russo was pronounced dead at the scene. 19-year-old Davion Flanagan also died from the devastating injuries sustained in the crash. Both families would soon be forced to confront a loss that no parent or loved one is ever prepared to face. Yet amid the destruction, one detail immediately drew attention. The driver, 17-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla, survived. Although she suffered serious injuries and required medical treatment, she ultimately recovered from the crash that claimed the lives of both passengers. As investigators began piecing together what had happened, questions quickly emerged. How could a collision of this magnitude leave one occupant alive while the other 2 were killed? What exactly occurred inside the vehicle during those final moments? And most importantly, was this simply a tragic accident or something far more deliberate? Those questions would soon become the center of a criminal investigation that attracted national attention. In the aftermath of the devastating crash, investigators faced a question that would soon divide public opinion across the country. How did a 17-year-old girl end up driving a car into a brick building at nearly 100 miles per hour? Before drawing any conclusions, authorities focused on the vehicle itself. The wrecked Toyota Camry underwent extensive examination by crash reconstruction specialists and forensic investigators. Every major system was scrutinized, including the brakes, steering assembly, engine components, and electronic controls. According to investigators, the inspection revealed no mechanical defects that could reasonably explain the collision. Nothing indicated a brake malfunction, steering failure, or any other technical issue capable of causing the vehicle to suddenly leave the roadway and continue accelerating toward the building. Attention then shifted to the physical evidence left behind at the crash scene. Investigators searched for signs that the driver had attempted to prevent the collision during the final moments. They found none. There were no indications of emergency braking, no meaningful decrease in speed, and no evidence suggesting a last-second effort to steer away from the obstacle directly ahead. Instead, data recovered from the vehicle suggested the opposite. The accelerator remained fully engaged as the Camry continued moving toward impact. To prosecutors, those findings pointed toward a deliberate act rather than a tragic loss of control. As the investigation expanded, detectives began examining Mackenzie Shirilla's relationship with Dominic Russo. Witness testimony, phone records, and messages presented during court proceedings described a romance marked by repeated breakups, intense arguments, jealousy, emotional instability, and periods of reconciliation. Prosecutors argued that the relationship had become increasingly toxic in the weeks leading up to the crash. Their theory was straightforward but deeply disturbing. They believed Mackenzie had become emotionally overwhelmed by the possibility of losing Dominic and made a conscious decision during those final moments behind the wheel. The prosecution's case centered on a motive often summarized by a chilling idea: if I can't have him, nobody can. The defense strongly rejected that interpretation. Attorneys argued there was no direct proof of murderous intent and maintained that investigators were relying heavily on assumptions about Mackenzie's emotional state. They insisted the crash could have been caused by a medical episode or another explanation that had never been fully explored. That disagreement became the heart of the case, because everything depended on the answer to one question. Was this the intentional act of a young woman determined to end 3 lives that night? Or was it a catastrophic accident that investigators believed they had already solved? As the investigation moved forward, prosecutors became convinced that the crash was intentional. Their findings eventually led to one of the most closely watched criminal trials in Ohio in recent years. What made the case even more unusual was the type of trial Mackenzie Shirilla chose. There would be no jury. Instead of presenting the evidence to 12 jurors, the case would be decided entirely by a single judge in what is known as a bench trial, a rare decision in a murder case carrying the possibility of a life sentence. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors built their case around science, technology, and the final seconds before impact. They presented surveillance footage showing Mackenzie driving normally less than a minute before the crash. They introduced black box data indicating that the accelerator remained fully depressed during the final 5 seconds. Investigators testified that the vehicle continued accelerating until the moment it struck the brick building, and that no mechanical defect could explain what happened. Prosecutors also focused heavily on Mackenzie's relationship with Dominic Russo. Witness testimony and communications between the couple painted a picture of a relationship marked by repeated breakups, emotional conflicts, jealousy, and intense arguments. According to the state, those tensions provided a possible motive behind the deadly collision. The defense offered a very different explanation. Their central argument was that Mackenzie suffered from POTS postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, a medical condition that can cause dizziness, fainting, rapid heart rate, and episodes of loss of consciousness. Defense attorneys suggested that Mackenzie may have experienced a medical event behind the wheel, leaving her unable to control the vehicle during the final moments before the crash. If that theory was correct, the collision would not have been an intentional act at all. It would have been a tragic accident caused by a sudden medical episode. For weeks, both sides challenged each other's conclusions. One side argued the evidence pointed to deliberate action. The other insisted there was reasonable doubt about what happened inside the car during those final seconds. Ultimately, the responsibility for answering that question rested with one person alone, the judge, who would decide whether Mackenzie Shirilla was guilty of murder or the victim of a catastrophic medical emergency. In the months following the crash, another controversial detail emerged, one that prosecutors and critics would later point to as highly suspicious. It happened while Mackenzie Shirilla was recovering in the hospital after the collision. According to reports discussed during later legal proceedings, Mackenzie asked for a private moment with her mother shortly after investigators began speaking with her. What happened next would become the subject of intense debate. The two allegedly communicated using an unusual coded form of speech rather than speaking normally in English. To outside listeners, the conversation sounded like a mixture of gibberish and altered words that were difficult to understand. At first, the exchange seemed meaningless. But years later, attorney Mark Eiglersch publicly discussed the conversation and claimed that portions of it were interpreted as Mackenzie and her mother discussing possible explanations for the crash. According to Eiglersch, the conversation appeared to include suggestions that she could tell investigators she had suffered a seizure or lost consciousness before impact. If accurate, such a discussion could potentially undermine the defense's later argument that a medical episode had genuinely caused the crash. Supporters of Mackenzie strongly dispute that interpretation. They argue that the conversation has never been definitively translated in court, and that claims about its meaning remain speculative. No official ruling established exactly what was said, and the defense has maintained that conclusions drawn from the exchange are based largely on interpretation rather than verified fact. Nevertheless, the incident attracted significant attention after the release of Netflix's The Crash and through subsequent media coverage. For critics, the conversation raised troubling questions. For supporters, it was another example of assumptions being treated as evidence. Either way, the mysterious hospital exchange became one of the most discussed and most disputed details in the entire Mackenzie Shirilla case. After weeks of testimony, expert analysis, surveillance footage, and arguments from both sides, the case finally came down to a single decision. Because this was a bench trial, there was no jury deliberation. The responsibility rested entirely with the judge. On the 14th of August 2023, the court delivered its verdict. The judge rejected the defense's argument that a medical episode caused the crash and concluded that the evidence showed Mackenzie Shirilla had acted intentionally during the final moments before impact. Particular weight was given to the black box data, which showed the accelerator pressed to the floor for several seconds before the collision. The court also considered the absence of braking, the lack of any evasive action, and the circumstances surrounding Mackenzie's relationship with Dominic Russo. Ultimately, the judge found Mackenzie guilty of murder for the deaths of both Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. The ruling shocked many observers. Some believed justice had been served. Others argued that too many questions remained unanswered. During sentencing, emotional statements were delivered by family members from both sides. The families of the victims described the devastating loss of two young men whose lives had been cut short. Mackenzie was sentenced to serve 15 years to life in prison. Although she may become eligible for parole after approximately 15 years, there is no guarantee she will ever be released. For the court, the case was decided. But for Mackenzie and her legal team, the fight was far from over. Their next battle would begin through the appeals process.
I pray for Mackenzie, and I want Mackenzie to come out a good person and really do some positive things in this world. And it's not too late. She's got a long life ahead of her. God only knows when she's going to get out, but I hope she does change.
Shirilla's defense attorney had no comment on the sentencing, but her mother tells us that they will be filing an appeal and that her daughter is 100% innocent of murder. She tells us her daughter, Mackenzie, would never kill the love of her life.
For many criminal cases, a guilty verdict marks the end of the story. For Mackenzie Shirilla, it was only the beginning of a new fight. Following her conviction, her legal team filed an appeal, arguing that serious mistakes had been made during the trial. However, the first appeal was unsuccessful. The appellate court reviewed the case and ultimately upheld the conviction, leaving the original verdict intact. But Mackenzie's attorneys were not ready to give up. A second appeal was prepared, this time focusing heavily on claims of ineffective assistance of counsel. Her new legal team argued that the attorney who represented her during trial failed to properly investigate key aspects of the defense. According to the appeal, trial counsel did not present medical experts who could explain Mackenzie's diagnosis of POTS, a condition that her family believes may have contributed to the crash. They also argued that important medical records confirming the diagnosis were never introduced as evidence. The appeal further claimed that the defense failed to challenge the prosecution's scientific conclusions with independent experts and did not fully utilize text messages that could have supported Mackenzie's version of events, including messages related to the steering wheel incident involving Dominic Russo weeks before the crash. However, the legal battle took an unexpected turn. The second appeal was filed one day after the deadline required under Ohio law. Just one day. Because of that missed deadline, the court rejected the filing without reviewing any of its arguments. The decision created an entirely new controversy. Supporters of Mackenzie argued that she should not lose her right to appeal because of a mistake allegedly made by her attorneys. Critics, meanwhile, maintain that procedural rules exist for a reason and must be followed regardless of the case. Today, Mackenzie's legal team continues seeking relief from the Ohio Supreme Court, hoping the court will restore her ability to pursue the appeal. Whether that request succeeds remains uncertain. But one thing is clear: even after the trial ended, the legal battle surrounding Mackenzie Shirilla was far from over. More than 2 years have passed since a white Toyota Camry slammed into a brick building on a summer night in Ohio. The crash lasted only seconds. The debate that followed has lasted years. For prosecutors, the evidence tells a clear story: a vehicle accelerating toward impact, a gas pedal pressed to the floor, no attempt to brake, no effort to avoid the collision. Combined with the turbulent relationship between Mackenzie Shirilla and Dominic Russo, they believe the crash was a deliberate act that ended 2 young lives. For Mackenzie, her family, and her supporters, the story looks very different. They argue that critical evidence was overlooked, that her medical condition was never fully explored in court, that mistakes made by her attorneys deprived her of a complete defense, and they continue to insist that what happened on the 31st of July 2022 was a tragic accident, not murder. Even today, the legal battle is not completely over. Questions surrounding her appeals remain the subject of ongoing discussion, while Netflix's The Crash has introduced the case to millions of new viewers around the world. Some walked away convinced that justice was served. Others were left wondering whether every piece of the puzzle had truly been examined. But regardless of where people stand, one reality remains unchanged. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan never came home. 2 families lost sons, 2 young men lost their futures, and a single decision made in a matter of seconds changed countless lives forever. Perhaps that is why this case continues to generate such strong reactions. Because beneath all the courtroom arguments, expert testimony, and online debates lies a question that still has the power to divide public opinion. Was Mackenzie Shirilla a grieving teenager caught in a catastrophic accident? Or a young woman who intentionally transformed a speeding car into a deadly weapon? And now we want to hear from you. Do you believe the evidence proved murder beyond a reasonable doubt? Or do you think there are still unanswered questions in this case? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of America's most controversial true crime cases, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next investigation. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next case.